This happened a few years ago, around late 2020 or early 2021, and honestly, I still have not really come to terms with how badly I ruined my own life because of it. I am 38, currently working a regular corporate 9-to-5 desk job, making just enough to pay rent, buy groceries, and take care of my wife and our daughter. It is fine, it is stable, but every single day feels like a slog because I know what I used to have. Before all this, I was a consistently profitable independent trader. I was not a millionaire. I traded futures on a 2-screen setup in my living room. I made between $8,000 and $14,000 most months, some months less. I made enough from the markets to set my own hours, pay my bills comfortably, and have total freedom. I had been doing it profitably for about 5 years, grinding through drawdowns and sticking to a strict edge I had refined the hard way. And I need to tell you how I gave that away. Not because someone stole it from me, not because the market crashed, not because of bad luck, because I could not stand that someone I helped ended up doing better than I did. Around the spring of 2021, my dad decided to sell the house I had grown up in. His workshop had become a museum of 40 years' worth of things he refused to throw away, and we badly underestimated how many boxes we would need. I drove to a hardware store a few miles from his place in Cincinnati to pick up more. If I had parked 2 spaces farther down, if I had gone after lunch instead of before, if I had picked another store, none of this would have happened. I know that is irrational. I still think about it anyway. I was loading flattened moving boxes onto a cart when someone said my name. I turned around and immediately recognized him, even though he had aged more than I had. I am going to call him Julian. That is not his real name, though. We both went to the same college. We were not best friends or anything, but we had been in the same supply chain management cohort. During our senior year, I had this massive freak medical emergency. My appendix ruptured right before finals week, and I was hospitalized for days. To this day, it is the sickest I have ever been. I was in the hospital for 6 days. My parents were in Michigan and could not afford to miss work. My roommate had already flown home for winter break. I was alone in a hospital bed with a drainage tube in my side, watching the ceiling, knowing I was going to fail 3 classes and lose the scholarship that was paying for everything. I barely remember the hospital. What I do remember is waking up one afternoon and seeing him sitting in one of those awful plastic chairs next to the bed. He had a backpack full of my textbooks. Apparently, he had convinced the resident advisor to unlock my dorm room, managed to get my physical textbooks, collected all the hard copy lecture notes from the professors, organized the assignments, and spent most of the day driving between campus and the hospital. He brought everything to the hospital so I would not lose my scholarship or fail the semester. I graduated because someone who barely knew me decided my problem was somehow his responsibility. I always felt like I owed him my entire life and my degree for that, but we lost touch for about 4 years after graduation. Seeing him at that hardware store was a shock. We grabbed coffee next door, and he filled me in on where life had taken him. He was stuck working this dead-end retail job at an auto parts store, pulling 60 hours a week just to afford a terrible, moldy basement room. It hit me hard. I felt this immediate obligation to pay him back for what he did for me in college. After all the talks, I gave him some money, collected his number, and drove back to my dad's house. At that time, my wife's pregnancy had become high risk, and since her mother was a retired obstetric nurse with a guest room 20 minutes from a good hospital, we decided it was best for her to stay at her mother's house a couple of hours away until the baby was born. So our house in Columbus was quiet, and I was largely alone in it. I called her that night and told her everything. We talked for a long time. I proposed letting Julian stay in our spare bedroom, and teaching him to trade. Temporarily, teaching him to trade long enough so he could get on his feet. She had real concerns. A near stranger in our space, with the baby coming, with everything already feeling precarious. But she knew what Julian had done for my education, and she trusted me. She agreed with clear conditions. The next day, I called Julian and told him to pack his things, quit the retail job if he could, and come stay with me in Columbus. We had a spare bedroom. It was empty. It had a bed, a desk, and a window that faced a parking lot. And I told him I would cover food. I told him that I was going to teach him how to trade. He was stunned and grateful for everything. A few days later, he moved in. For the next 9 months, my life revolved around mentoring him. I taught him everything I knew and treated it like a second job. I taught him my exact strategy, risk management, and the psychological side of trading. I taught him everything that made me consistently profitable. He was a phenomenal and dedicated student. Because he had been so desperate, he possessed a terrifying level of focus. By maybe mid-2022, I paid for him to take a prop firm evaluation challenge. It actually took him 3 attempts to pass, and I covered the fees every time, because I believed in him. Once he was funded, he started pulling consistent payouts. We were both pulling money from the markets and celebrating the losses and wins. The energy in the apartment was great. On Fridays, if we had had a good week, we would grab beers at this dive bar near the apartment and talk about nothing related to trading, just sports, movies, and the weird neighbor who washed his car at midnight every week, in all weather, without apparent explanation. Eventually, he had enough saved. He found a studio apartment in Midtown and moved out right after New Year's, around the time my wife and newborn daughter came back home. I remember holding my daughter for the first time, feeling her weight against my chest, and thinking that everything had lined up exactly how it was supposed to. We created a Discord server with just the 2 of us, where we would post charts, annotate trades, and recap the week. We kept in touch there daily. Julian would come over most weekends. We would sit at the kitchen table and go through charts together, chat, laugh, eat whatever my wife had made, walk to this coffee shop on High Street, and plan out the week ahead. My daughter invented a nickname for him when she started talking. He became, without any ceremony or announcement, a very close family friend and my best friend. At that time, he was pulling consistent payouts from the market. I was very happy for him. If the story had ended there, I would never be writing this. About a year later, he casually mentioned he had bought a place. When he casually invited my wife and me over for a low-key housewarming, I did not expect much. I expected a decent condo. Instead, it was a well-maintained colonial on a quiet street in a neighborhood called Oakley, about 5 miles east of downtown Cincinnati. 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors throughout, the kind of place with original crown molding that is genuinely hard to find still intact. It was not extravagant, no pool, no theater room, nothing performative. But it was a family home in a neighborhood where houses did not stay listed long, in a school district people moved to specifically because of the school district. The kind of place you buy when you intend to stay somewhere. I sat on his new couch and felt something cold and heavy settle in the bottom of my stomach. I asked him, probably a bit too directly, whether he had really paid for it with trading profits. He just laughed, completely humble, and explained he had been saving aggressively for months, that he had learned from the best. He meant it as a compliment. He was publicly crediting me at the party, telling everyone that he would not be anywhere without me. He said he had saved aggressively. He did not say from what. He did not break down the math to me. He indirectly kept it as a secret from me for a long time. On the walk back to my car that evening after the housewarming party, I found his house listing history on my phone and stood in his driveway staring at the price. The math bothered me in ways I could not resolve. He had been trading seriously for a little over 2 years. I had been doing it for 5 years, and here he was, with a house I could not have afforded, after a fraction of the time, and he had never explained how. The math did not add up. Maybe he had made one massive trade I did not know about. Maybe there was family money he had never mentioned. Maybe he had had savings from years of retail work that he had quietly accumulated. Maybe he was doing something else entirely that he had not told me about. I did not know. I still do not know. He never told me. And that unknowing was a far more effective poison than any answer would have been. A number I could have rationalized. A mystery I could not. Then, maybe 2 or 3 months after the house, while battling with the pressure of knowing Julian was making more money than me, I was sitting in my living room when I heard a deep, throaty exhaust rumble outside. I looked out the window and saw a brand new matte gray Mercedes-Benz pulling up to my curb. The moment I saw him step out to approach my wife, who was outside at the time, I received the biggest shock of my life. I thought he had borrowed it or something, until he told me the car was his. I wish I could say I was happy for him. I wish I could say I looked at that car and felt proud of the guy I rescued from a moldy basement. But my stomach physically curdled and my heart was racing. I forced a fake smile, walked outside, patted him on the back, and said all the right things. Told him it suited him, but inside I was screaming. That night I could not sleep. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Feeling extremely pressured, I kept doing math in my head. The house, the car, his lifestyle. It did not add up neatly in my head. Was he really making all of this from trading? The math kept coming out the same way, and the answer was that he was making more than me. Significantly more. Possibly much more. That was the moment my edge died. To survive in markets, you have to be completely detached from money, as a measure of anything other than the score of the game you are playing today. The moment you are trading to prove something to someone, including yourself, you are already ruined. You trade the setup in front of you, not the outcome you need. I became entirely infected by envy and comparison, and I felt immense pressure. I did not call it that at the time. I called it scaling up. I told myself I had been too conservative for too long. Out of pure greed, unchecked ego, and a desperate pressure to make more money than him, I destroyed my trading career in the span of 6 months. I began over-leveraging. I began gambling. I chased losses with the logic of someone who has stopped thinking clearly and started thinking desperately. Every bad decision made the next one feel necessary to recover from the last one. I wiped out my entire trading capital. In the darkest and worst way possible, it was a nightmare. One day, Julian came to visit. I had stopped picking up his calls and replying to his messages. I had lost a noticeable amount of weight. I had stopped posting in our private Discord, and a few days prior, I had quietly left the server entirely. He asked if anything was wrong, saying he was ready to help at any cost. I told him everything was fine before he could finish the sentence. I said it with enough control that I almost convinced myself. He nodded. He never brought it up again. He stayed another hour and eventually left. I stood at the window and watched him pull out of the driveway. I had secretly sworn to myself that I would rather watch my entire life burn to the ground than accept a single dollar from him. I had decided that I would never tell him, not because I hated him, but because I could not stand the symmetry of it. I could not stand the idea that I had become the one who needed rescuing from him. In the worst weeks, I caught myself doing something I am still ashamed to write down. I would lie in the dark and quietly hope he lost everything. His wealth. I really wanted him to lose his house. I wanted him to lose the car. Not because I hated him, but because I was so broken that I needed him to be poor again, just so I could feel normal. That is the darkest thing I have ever generated inside my own mind. I cut Julian off completely, blocked him everywhere, asked my wife to do the same, which created its own damage between us that I am not going to detail here. As a matter of fact, because of the pure humiliation and pressure of having him around, I chose to sell our house in Columbus and rented an apartment somewhere far enough away that Julian had no reason to turn up at the door. And if he did, he would not find us there. He did not know where we moved. He was the cause of my downfall. I turned $11,000 into $58,000 in 4 hours, then blew it all down to $1,200 in the next 2 hours. I'm typing this a few days after it happened, not for drama or pity, but for my own clarity. I need to face how fragile discipline can be, especially when everything is going right. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when I sat down to trade. I trade mainly futures, mostly the E-mini S&P 500 and NASDAQ contracts. My account sat at about $11,000, a balance I had built steadily from an initial $5,000 over the past 8 months. The growth had been slow and methodical, consistent adherence to my rules, defined risk per trade, hard stop losses, and a firm habit of walking away after a bad session. The market that day was alive with opportunity. News-driven volatility created clean price structures and strong volume, perfect conditions for my setups. I spotted a standard entry and took it. The trade worked out cleanly, adding about $900 to the account. Another similar setup appeared soon after, and that one hit too. By late morning, I was up just over $3,000. Now, that was the point where my mindset shifted. It didn't feel reckless in the moment. I felt sharp, in tune with the market, and confident in my analysis. So, I increased my position size a bit, rationalizing that the risk was still manageable given how well the day was flowing. The wins kept coming. Early afternoon brought a new milestone. The balance hit $24,000. I paused, staring at the balance. It represented months of careful trading compressed into a few hours. A part of me knew I should log off and lock in the gains, but I stayed glued to the charts. By mid-afternoon, the account climbed to $58,000. I had made $47,000 in profit in roughly 4 hours. Strangely, it didn't feel real. The money felt abstract, detached from the effort it normally takes to earn it. In a surge of excitement, I screenshotted the balance and sent it to my girlfriend. She called right away, her voice bubbling with plans for what this could mean for us. Trips, savings, a better future. I tried to stay composed, but I knew I should have stopped trading at that point. But I didn't. My first loss came quickly. A trade went against me, hitting my stop for a $4,800 loss. Instead of accepting it, I widened the stop slightly, convincing myself it was just temporary noise and the setup was still valid. That loss affected me more than it should have, not because of the amount, but because it shattered the illusion of total control I had built that day. Almost immediately, I jumped into another trade, bigger this time, determined to claw back what I had lost. It failed too. Another $6,000 vanished. I was still sitting on massive profits for the day, but my thinking had changed. The $58,000 balance became the reference point. Any drawdown from it felt unacceptable, even though I was still in profit. I increased my size again on the next trade. Price moved sharply against me. I watched the unrealized loss grow, and I removed my stop entirely, convincing myself the market would reverse from these oversold levels. But it didn't. My balance dipped below $40,000. Panic crept in, disguised as conviction. Then I made the fatal choice. I went all in on a single NASDAQ contract, full account margin, no stop. I justified it with technical language, oversold conditions, support levels. In reality, I was trying to force the market to undo my mistakes, but the market kept falling. 14 agonizing minutes later, the position was liquidated. All that remained was about $1,200. I didn't react immediately. I sat quietly, reviewing the sequence of decisions. There was no single dramatic mistake, just a gradual erosion of discipline, one rationalized decision after another. Later, my girlfriend called. I told her I had lost most of the gains. When I explained how much, she became quiet and said she needed time. We haven't spoken much about it since. This wasn't about lacking knowledge. In real time, I knew exactly what I was doing wrong, moving stops, oversizing, chasing losses with emotion. I watched myself do it anyway. The root of it was that the money had stopped feeling real. It turned into a scoreboard, not hard-earned capital. When the drawdown hit, I wasn't protecting my account anymore. I was chasing a ghost, the peak balance I had glimpsed. Starting over with $1,200 is difficult, but that isn't the most important part. The real lesson carved into me is this: my biggest weakness isn't in losing streaks, it's in the winning ones. When the stars align and profits flow easily, I start believing my own rules no longer apply to me. That's the danger I have to face head on from now on. I'm going to tell you about 3 days in March. 3 days that I will never forget for the rest of my life. First, let me tell you who I was before this happened, because that context matters. That context is actually the whole point. I've been trading for 6 years. I want to say that not to impress you, but because it makes everything I'm about to tell you worse. I started on Forex like most people do. I've blown accounts, rebuilt, and spent a solid 4 years in that phase, where nothing makes sense, where you don't know if your strategy is bad, or if you are just in constant doubt. Eventually, I found my edge, or something close enough to one. I became profitable about 3 years ago. I narrowed my focus almost entirely to gold. It's the only pair I really trust myself in. I learned how it moves differently from Forex pairs, the way it responds to the DXY. It's volatile, it's beautiful, and it's the most humbling pair I've ever touched. I love it and I hate it equally. If you trade gold, you know exactly what I mean. At the time of this story, I had funded accounts through 2 prop firms with 14 months of consistent profitability. I also had a $500 account at a particular broker. I keep smaller accounts on certain brokers for various reasons, but that's a different conversation. The $500 account is what this story is about. So it was a Monday in March. Gold had been in a clean, technically sound uptrend for the better part of a week. Over the weekend, there had been a meaningful escalation in geopolitical tensions. I won't be more specific than that, both because it's not relevant and because part of me still doesn't want to think about that weekend. I woke up early that Monday, checked the charts before I even got out of bed, and saw that price had swept a significant swing low overnight. It was a liquidity grab beneath a level I had marked on my chart weeks earlier, a demand zone that had held multiple times across different time frames. It was the kind of level that when you draw it, you circle it, put a star next to it, and tell yourself, if price ever gets back here, I'm interested. It had gotten back there, and the sweep was clean. I also noticed the spread was tight, not unusual for gold in early London, but notable given the news environment. Volatility without spread widening usually means the liquidity is there. I'm telling you all of this because I want you to understand that the setup was real. This wasn't a gamble on noise. If you had shown me that chart with no account information attached, I would have said it was a high-quality entry, and I would have taken the trade. What happened next had nothing to do with the setup being wrong. What happened next was me. So I entered long on the trade. I didn't go small. I built into the position about 0.5 lots at a time, until I was sitting at roughly 3 lots total on a $500 account. I was trading with an Exness broker using 1 to unlimited leverage, so technically I could take that kind of exposure on a $500 account. And I did. I had already half accepted losing the $500. Gold moved almost immediately in my direction. I'm watching my account go from $500 to $2,000, then $6,000. I remember standing up from my desk and just pacing. My heart was going. I kept refreshing even though it was live. It hit around $11,000, and I remember I called my brother. I didn't tell him what was happening. I just called him to have something normal to hold on to, because the moment felt completely surreal. I kept adding positions, scaling in 2 more times, and the account kept climbing. By the end of that first day, and I want to be precise here because I've replayed this so many times, I was sitting somewhere between $60,000 and $65,000 on a $500 account. I didn't sleep that night properly. I kept waking up to check my phone. The positions were still open, and gold was still elevated. I told myself I'd manage it in the morning with a clear head. Morning came. I tightened some things, moved the stop up to lock in a big portion of the gains, and I kept watching. By midday of the second day, the account had pushed past $100,000. I'm not going to pretend I was calm. I was really shaking. I kept thinking about what that money meant. Debt I could clear, things I could do for my family, and the fact that in 6 years of trading, I'd never seen a number like that with my name on it. By the time it peaked, and I checked this multiple times afterward because I needed to know the exact number for my own closure, the account had reached just under $200,000, $194,000, and change, if I'm being precise, on day 3. 72 hours after I put on a trade with $500, I closed everything because I was scared. Pure, overwhelming fear. I'd never had that much on the line, and something in me just panicked and said, "Get out." So I closed every single position, sat back, and looked at the number. For about 45 minutes, I felt the most incredible relief I've ever felt in my life. Then I started watching the chart again. Gold pulled back drastically after I closed, and I sat there nodding like I'd timed it perfectly, feeling like an absolute genius. But then it found support, and it started pushing back up. I watched it slowly, then quickly, start reclaiming the move, and something shifted in me. That relief I mentioned started curdling. It turned into this horrible, itchy anxiety, where I kept thinking that I left money on the table, that the move wasn't done, and that I got out too early. I want to describe that feeling as accurately as I can, because I think anyone who's traded knows it. It's not exactly greed, or at least it doesn't feel like greed from the inside. It feels like logic. My brain was constructing a completely rational argument for why getting back in was a smart move. So I got back in, bigger than before, because I now had $194,000 in the account, and my brain had recalibrated to that number. The lot sizes I put on were, I can barely type this, appropriate for a much larger account. If the trade worked, it would be massive. If it didn't, it would be catastrophic. I think somewhere inside me, I was trying to get to $500,000. I don't think I consciously said that number, but looking back, that's what my hands were doing. Gold pushed up a little after I entered, maybe $3,000, or $4,000 in profit briefly, enough to make me feel vindicated, enough to make me hold. Then it reversed. Not a small pullback, but a real, sustained, aggressive reversal. The lot sizes I had on meant that every pip against me was hitting like a truck. I watched $194,000 become $150,000. I believed it was a retracement, so I held. It became $90,000, and I held still. You can imagine how dumb and greedy I really was. Then it became $40,000. By this point, I was sitting at my desk, with my hands in my hands, genuinely unable to think straight, just watching the liquidation happen in slow motion. I couldn't close. Every time I moved to close a trade, I'd think, what if I close and then it reverses? It was the same broken logic that got me into this. I lost everything. The account closed out at just over $200, a margin call that left me with basically nothing. Here's what I've accepted about myself since this happened. Knowing the rules means nothing if you don't have the character to follow them when it counts. I had all the knowledge, I had the experience, and in the moment that mattered most, I acted like a complete amateur. It wasn't because I didn't know better, but because knowing better and doing better are two different muscles.